Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. I have been looking forward to this show, but more importantly, Mag, who's in the other room, is also looking forward to this show because Liberty Phillips, our guest today, is very close to Mag, and I like her as well. Met her several times in Normandy, and we're talking about her amazing project where she brings young people over to Normandy from America to understand the battlefield. So I bring my friend Liberty in. So good afternoon, Liberty. How are you today?
Hello, I'm doing fantastic. We had our
So,
rain, so Texas has
okay,
cooled down.
good. So some people know who you are, some people don't know who you are, but it's a trite question to start with, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that kind of is so how did you get into World War II history, Liberty?
The most concise version I can give is I was kind of brought up with military history. My grandfather was very much interested in history and took his 6 kids to all the battlefields all around the world. And so my dad brought my 7 siblings and I that way. We went on holidays instead of going to like amusement parks. We're going to battlefields and cemeteries. And I spent my 13th birthday at Appomattox Courthouse, where the Civil War ended. So that was kind of how I was born and bred. And then my dad started introducing me to World War II veterans when I was very young. He took me to my first reunion when I was 8. It was the 60th anniversary of Iwo Jima. And he said, these men are really important. They fought in World War II. He explained it and said, you don't understand it all now, but you'll get it someday, but meet them, talk to them. So I went around interviewing them. So fast forward a bunch of years, I met some British veterans, which we can go into that later, who were part of the D-Day invasion. And one of them became like my surrogate grandpa. And that just opened a world for me where I realized this is a very fleeting time with our veterans. And you can read about history or you can talk to it. And so my sisters and I started Operation Meatball, which the name, people have been asking about this for 10 years. The name was just like an accident. We were like, Operation this, Operation that, Operation Meatball. We'll change it in a month. And we never did. So it's a little bit, it's a little bit ridiculous sounding, but it's worked because with my nonagenarians, my vets who are 95, 98, they remember that name. So they call me up, hey, how the Meatball Girl's doing? So that's kind of how it started. I was just like born into this. My immediate family isn't military. Though I had a great uncle who he was on the Bataan Death March and then would die in a POW camp in the Philippines. So his story influenced me a lot, but it was just this combination of just growing up on battlefields. That's kind of where it is.
Well, I think I and a lot of people watching can relate to that. And one of the things that obviously we're going to talk about and I admire you for is the bridging. I mean, we're going to talk about your bridge project, but it is that bridging of generations, because I see it when veterans come to Normandy, which is happening less and less, is that there's the people who want to connect with them, and there's people who just sort of stand in the background and they're in awe of these people. There's this distance. They don't know how perhaps to communicate. They don't know how to go up and say something to these veterans. The veterans likewise don't know at what point it's okay to kind of go over and start talking. And one of the things you're very good at, you and your sisters and siblings, is doing that thing where you just get, hey, you talk to you, and then suddenly the generation disappear and you realize that a 95-year-old man can have just as much spark for life as an 18-year-old teenager, and that connection is made. So is there a kind of a way you go about that, or do you think that's something you kind of were born with, that skill?
Definitely not born with that. I was very I'm not timid, just very shy for a very long time. But the joke in our family is we all have a very strong case of FOMO, fear of missing out. And so when we started getting really involved with the veteran community, the concept of the awkwardness of walking up to a stranger versus missing out on an opportunity to make not only a new friend, but hear an incredible story and share their legacy from that, it balanced out. And I think that kind of switched in my head. It was 2011, and the last World War I American veteran, Frank Buckles, died. And I'd read about him when he turned, I think he turned 110 or 111 that year. And I was like, I want to meet him. So I wrote him a letter. I got it sent. I was super excited to go meet him. And then he died. So after that, I was like, okay, no matter how uncomfortable things are, I was 14 then. I said, no matter how uncomfortable things are, I would rather just put myself out there and just go talk to a stranger. And it's a little bit of a learning curve, but you find little ways to talk to people. And at the end of the day, old people just want to talk to you.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
old people love to talk. And so it's just finding something to start that conversation. If it's a hat, if it's a button, if it's, something funny
Well,
they
look what
say.
Andrew
So
Biggio did with the rifle.
yes.
That brilliant thing of just putting something into someone's hands, and then the stories coming out. Because I've spoken to, interviewed hundreds of World War II veterans, and it never gets any easier. That first conversation, you go
Yeah.
up and how do I introduce myself? Do I say I'm a tour guide? Do I say I'm a historian? Do I say I'm British first? Do I say I live here? What do I say? I've never got a kind of a formula down, and you have to
Exactly.
overcome that first 2 or 3 minutes, and then by whatever process it is, you start talking about the insignia on the shoulder, or where the location you're at, and what's your memories of this, and suddenly normally you find yourself in an area where it's a lot more comfortable, but that first bit is really difficult and never
You know,
gets
it's
any easier.
it's funny that you're saying that because I haven't really talked to anyone about that in a while because uh, I don't know. I guess we're all just out there acting like, yeah, we've got this figured out. But it is true. But like you're saying with the rifle, having something tangible which connects you with them. I mean, I've seen vets who I've been overseas with vets who were like clam shut. They wouldn't say anything the whole trip just because they didn't want to talk. And then they see their truck that they drove in the war. Like one of this vet, John, he was a truck driver and he sees it. He had said 5 words in 5 days. He sees it and he gets behind the wheel and suddenly he's just got all these things to talk about, and they're hilarious and they're sad and they're interesting. So sometimes finding that point of connection with them. I actually, and it was 4 or 5 years ago now, because I was getting asked by a lot of young people how to go talk to vets. I wrote it's just like a PDF ebook, literally called How to Talk to World War II Veterans. And all it is just suggested ideas of these are introductory questions you can ask them. These are suggestions. This is a really good pattern of questioning to follow so they don't feel like they're being interviewed, so that it's a natural conversation. And then it just flows after that. But yes, the first 2 minutes.
No, definitely. And another thing I want to talk about, and we'll get into this later on possibly, is this what we're going to do next, because we're talking about the fact the World War II generation is just about gone now. I mean, it hasn't
Yeah.
gone. We've got a couple more years, maybe a few more years, but I've been in Normandy for 22 years. Each time a big anniversary comes, we say, well, this is going to be the last one where there are numbers
Right.
here. And we said that for the 60th and the 65th, the 70th and 75th. But the 80th, realistically, is
Yeah.
going to be the last one where by the time the 85th comes around, it's going to be a very, very
Mhm.
different there. And so how, I want to ask, well, it's come up now. How will we move forward when
This
we're
is
trying to create people to have an interest in World War II when they won't have spoken to a person who lived through it? Because, for me, I mean, it was my own family, my own granddad, my own great uncle. They'd served in World War II, so I didn't have to go very far to find them. But I had that direct, immediate connection immediately. But if you're a prospective historian who's going to be writing a book on, I don't know, Tarawa in 20 years' time, and you're 0 years old now or 10 years old now, how will they have that immediacy of not having spoken to a veteran? What do you think the solution is to this? How are we going to deal with the process of saying goodbye to the generation?
Yeah, this has been like the biggest question I've asked with my sisters the last 10 years, and we've talked about just watching this process because I remember a day where I was at the World War II Memorial in DC, and we had 1,000 World War II vets come through there in one day. They were working with an organization called Honor Flight, and I was just mind blown. And now there's just literally a handful. So this is I think about Americans have a really big fascination with the Civil War, the American Civil War. It's endlessly interesting. It's very complicated. It's very divisive. There's just a lot, but we're really kind of obsessed with the storytelling of it. But there are no more Civil War vets.
Hmm.
So how has that continued on? Well, that's movies, stories, but a lot of World War II vets I've spoken with grew up with Civil War vets, and they
Yeah.
have told me those stories. And when in speaking with him, I thought this is a 150-year circle that just came complete because I'm talking to someone who lived 150 years ago, and that person's life is now become alive to me. So that's why I started Bridge to History, though, because I was trying to figure out what do I do with Operation Meatball. I've been doing it for years. It's life enrichment, it's programs with the vets, it's going over to battlefields, it's all of these things. and they're gone. So how do I take everything I've learned? Because I've been entrusted with a lot of stories, and I I'm gonna get married, have a family someday, and my attentions are gonna be a little bit more spread. And I've had vets tell me, um, well, not to digress, but I was sitting with an Iwo Jima vet one time. He was dying. He had cancer. And we're just sitting in his living room, in his chair, and his dog was on his lap. And he said, so he was just out of the blue, when are you going to write your book? I was like, oh, Bill, I don't know. I'm not going to write a book. And he said, Liberty, I'm dying. You've heard all my stories and you know all of these veterans, and I am expecting you to write my story or tell my story or share it. So that's a lot. It's a lot. It's a big burden to have. And it's, I think, but moving into the next few years, you got to find other ways. So that's where Bridge to History comes in, finding young kids who are very passionate and excited to learn and become, they're going to become the translators. So they will meet the last veterans, they'll talk with them. I and they will and then they'll carry that on to their generation. That's why I've started calling them my Bridge to History ambassadors, because they're going to represent the old guard, the old generation, and share that on with their age group. So how to do this, you take them to the battlefields and you show them firsthand, because then it becomes real. When last year I took the kids to Omaha Beach and it was at low tide, and some of them put on a pack, or like a World War II pack, and then some of the kids just put another kid on their back, approximately the weight of the gear the soldiers would have worn coming on the
Right.
beach. And I said, all right, you run from the water to the beachhead. And it's a long run, and it was hard. And the visual, you could just see these things clicking in their head. And suddenly the stories they'd been reading and the faces and the names they'd been seeing and hearing about it came true. And they were like, I'm not even being shot at, but their story is alive in my head. And I am now the protector. I am responsible. It's like I'm holding the box, which is going to determine, are they remembered? Are they important? And or are they going to be forgotten? So summed up, I think I really believe children are the best way to keep the World War II veterans' legacy alive, and just giving them all the opportunity they can to come as close to touching that history as possible and make them excited about it.
Well, got a great response, and we will get into exactly how Bridge to History works and how people can help. But the question that I think is inevitable at this stage is what is the right age to start telling people about something as serious as World War II, which involved millions of deaths, lots of suffering, lots of atrocities, lots of really awful incidents. And yet, as you said yourself, with the experience of the kids running across the beach, when you're young, you're a sponge for information. You are
Yeah.
every learning is easy. Look at how easy it is to learn a language when you're in 5 years old, and how difficult it is when you're in your 40s or 50s and you move countries. So how do you find that you get that balance right between the right age of child to have them absorb this information, but at the same time not put them off, because there is so much tragedy in World War II? How do you deal with that?
I'm really glad you asked this question, because I love it, actually. I I believe you have to find a really good balance with children in exposing them to the real world, not
Yeah.
protecting them so much that they turn 15 and suddenly they're horrified to learn that people die and there's pain and suffering and all that. But you want to give them as much of a childhood as possible. I think the way I was brought up, there was a really good balance of that. I went to a lot of funerals when I was little. I remember looking at my great grandmother lying in the casket, because it was explained to me, this is just this isn't her anymore. This is her earthly body, and her soul is gone. Um, it wasn't scary. So in regards to teaching the kids about war and about history, I think that's when the individual stories help make a difference, because if you give a lot of statistics, it's going to go in and out of their ears, or it's going to be too aggressive for them. But if you tell the story of the individuals, the Bedford Boys, which I know is like an iconic D-Day story, then in that story you learn about um, hard work, good work ethic, patriotism, family, and what it's like to lose your twin. And
Mm.
that's a really hard story, and it's difficult to grasp, but it gets in there. Kids, like you said, they're a sponge, and a lot of the information they hear, perhaps they don't understand it at the moment, but it comes to them afterwards. One of the things I do when I bring the kids over to France is we go to the cemeteries. It's very important to go to the cemeteries. Obviously, Omaha Cemetery, but we start them at Granville Cemetery, which I love the Commonwealth cemeteries because it's like walking into an English garden. It's beautiful. You just feel so at peace. And then the epitaphs on each of the gravestones are, some of them are personalized.
Mm. Mm.
And so when I'm there with the kids, I'll show them the photo if there's an image of the soldier buried below, and we read the epitaph and we say, this is the cost of war. We go to the German cemetery and we say, this is the cost of what happens when you lose. This is what their cemetery looks like. It's a beautiful one. It's moving, but it's not visited a lot. There's got multiple people buried in a grave. And you say, this is the price. You don't have to go into the details of the blood and the guts and the actual trauma of it, but the visual for them to just go from an English garden to kind of a really sad, a little bit depressing cemetery is very impactful. The kids we took last year were I wasn't sure how they were going to take it, because this is my first time taking 10-year-olds to a cemetery, besides my going with my siblings. But one of the kids, actually two of the boys in particular, just went row by row writing down all the names. And as he's writing down the names, he's reading their names and he's saying, I'm going to remember you. He says, I'm going to remember you. And then he goes to another grave and he goes, I'm going to remember you. And these are to the English, these are to the Americans. And then he said these to the German graves too. And I got really emotional seeing that, because I realized he gets the concept. He understands the horrors of war in the way a 10-year-old needs to understand it, which is very
Mm.
simple. It's not beautiful, it's not glamorous, but it's real, and he gets it. So there's a balance there. Some of the kids, some of the kids who've been studying World War II for a while, they've like watched Band of Brothers or Saving Private Ryan. So there's an element where American kids just kind of do grow up a little bit faster and they can handle that. But I think you give them I think you give them big concepts in small packages,
Mm.
um, and make it as
I,
relatable as possible.
I like what you said about it not having to necessarily land immediately, because there's people watching us right now, educators who have to get their students of various ages through a course. There are exams at the end of the semester, the term, the year, whatever it would be. So the information dropping in 2 years later will not get you through the exam. You need to have it within that time frame. But with children of that age, I definitely like the idea of this drip effect, where
Mm-hmm.
you're not quite sure, they're not quite sure at the time how much it means to them. But then later on, when they get to the age where they're starting to read a book by John McManus or Alex Kershaw or James Holland, whoever it would be, it's stirring up the memories they had with you 5 years earlier. Oh yeah, I get it now. I get that sense of what it was like to be alone on a battlefield or a beach, or the distance involved, or seeing that German bunker, or seeing the grave of that person there. So that's where education is different for you, in that the results can come later. It's about creating something for a long-term vision of this, as opposed to a short-term gain.
Exactly. I like your phrase, the drip effect, actually, because that.
You may use that on your website. I won't
Yes,
charge anything for it.
I'm gonna credit you. I'm gonna say the drip effect. But it's in perhaps that is my mentality on that has affected how I was educated. My education is a little different than a lot of the kids I bring on the trips. I was home educated, but that didn't mean that means a lot of things to a lot of people. It means I tell people that we were schooled 365 days a year, no holidays. Um, but the mentality of how my parents raised me was, um, you have all the time you need to learn everything, and you never stop. So
Mm.
there's no rush to get everything in your head at this moment, because you can't force it. And these things are, some of these concepts are slow concepts, especially if they're really heavy. Sacrifice is a really heavy concept, that it means one thing when you're young and another thing when you're older. And honestly, if you look at your relationship with a parent, when you're little, you're like, I don't understand how my parents are sacrificing things. Their sacrifice is a sacrifice for my mom when I'm 6 is like her sharing her food with me. 10 years later, when I'm 16, I go, oh no, no, she's sharing her life with me. She literally is giving her life to take care of me. So these are things which you grow and build on. Um, and then the kids, they just want to learn, so they will take it all in.
Okay, well, we're enjoying it, and the viewers are enjoying it. So let's go back to basics and talk about the project and how you find the children, how you fund it, how people can help you. And then we've got a couple of questions coming in about, for example, Rob Crane is asking, do the visits tie in what they're studying at school? So do you liaise with parents and educators and find out what it is they're trying to do? But maybe we can deal with that question in a minute. So how do you find the kids? Let's do that. Let's deal with that one first.
So this is popular question. I have an application process, and to be honest, I haven't had to do a lot of marketing out because I've just had a lot of word of mouth and social media. I've got kids from all the states. Last year I had 6 or 5 states represented. I think this year I've got 6 states represented, and they're all demographics: homeschool, private school, public school, combination. And it's word of mouth. People who there's some friends. Well, that's just how it is. Actually, we have an application process, and then the kids write in. They fill out an application, and then they have to write an essay, and then they have to do a video. So to come on the program, they have to work, because I don't want to bring kids who their parents are dragging them by the arm. These are for kids who are dragging their parents by the arm. They're saying, come on, mom, dad, this is my life. It doesn't, in answer to the question, it doesn't, I'm not really planning it around what they're already learning at the moment. These are, I guess the kids have been studying World War II. It's been their hobby, passion for, as they all say, my entire life. The theme from the kids when I call them up and say, you're on the trip, is, I'm so excited. I've been waiting my entire life for this. And I love that. I love that. Right.
Yeah.
Because I've got a 10-year-old telling me he's been waiting for so long, since he started to read. So they follow the application process, and it is pretty extensive, because I want to know the nature of how we curate the trip. I want kids who are going to be ambassadors and be able to communicate. So writing and the video is to show, hey, you can put ideas into paper, into pen, and you can communicate that too. And some of the kids, it's harder, some of them are a little shy, but through the process of leading up to the trip, I have them fundraise $500 because I want them to start. I want to give them a talking point. So it's hard to just go walk up to, say, a Lions Club and say, hey, can I tell you about my trip? But if you go to a Lions Club and say, I'm raising money for my trip, will you hear me talk? Then people say, all right, what do you have to say? So I've seen some of the students who started out, one of my 9-year-olds last year, very intelligent, so bright, but kind of shy. By the time the trip came around, he'd been giving a lot of talks, and he went from being a little shy 9-year-old to being pretty confident. And then post-trip, he was giving like news interviews and talks every month, and then to his school.
Wow.
And he's now like unstoppable. And this is just in a year. So
I have to just jump in and say how good it is that you have the kids do some fundraising themselves, because it would eliminate any kind of sense of entitlement that good things in life just happen without hard work. Because if we're going to go back and use D-Day as a metaphor, there, D-Day wasn't achieved by anything other than lots of preparation, lots of planning, and lots of hard work and graft. And so, just giving a kid hey, you're getting an overseas trip. That's it. You got it. That's a little bit easy. Having them work at it, commit to it, and fulfill a certain number of tasks is that's part of the learning itself, isn't it?
It is. I had the kids last year. They all drew me maps of the D-Day invasion. It was so cute. Perhaps it wouldn't work in an actual invasion. Can't go by those maps, but it was, you could see the creativity going, the wheels spinning in their heads, because now they've had to go read a book. Then they have to go look at a map, and then they have to figure out the units, and then and it goes on and on. So yes, you need to have a little bit of skin in the game to get really invested.
Okay, so we've done about how the process of the kids apply, and by the way, folks, I should have said it earlier, but all the links to Operation Meatball and everything else that is doing are in the description below. But the next burning question, the $1 million question, is how do you fund this? Because I mean, it's not easy getting kids over to Europe. So, and how can people help?
It is. Oh, I've set up scholarship programs for each of the kid, and it's honestly fundraising. Operation Meeple. So Bridge to History is a program of Operation Meeple, and Operation Meeple is a 501(c)(3). So you can donate there. We have a specified. You actually for each of the kids, you can specify who you want to sponsor. But largely, I put the trip together by private sponsors and donors and community effort. I try to go that avenue because I want people to invest in the kids who are really excited about the kids, not just someone who says, all right, here's cash, take it and run with it. I mean, that's awesome too, because it takes a lot
For the
of work to
record,
put
you will just take
it.
cash and run with
We will,
it.
we will,
In
but
a legally, yeah, wait, yeah.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, so the Bridge to History, I wanted to create a program which could take kids who are not going to necessarily be going over to Normandy in France, who don't have that opportunity. It doesn't mean they're on the lowest bracket, but I'm aiming for kids who perhaps their family just has a life and can't afford to take off that time or that money. So because of that, I want them to have to go without putting a dollar into it. So I raise the money myself through my organization and sponsors. So yes, if you have a company or a business who would like to sponsor a kid, a full child or half a child sponsorship, we would love to work with you because, I mean, honestly, it makes the companies look really good. It shows there's a real symbiotic relationship because the kids, when the kids come back to America is really when their work starts, because then there's community
Yeah.
investment. They have to go back to everyone who sponsored them, and they have to start getting connected with their veterans group. They have to start getting connected with their local cemeteries to find the KIAs who are there and learn their stories. So this is a very, very much community centered
And
program.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Liberty, because as a tour guide, Mag's a tour guide, we all know, and Colin is watching, and my best friend is a tour guide, we all know there's certain groups you take, they've pretty much forgotten everything you've told them before they've even got through the door of the hotel at the end of the day. It was something they've done. They've had a great time. They're off now, and they're going off to their next location. They're off to Belgium or something else. I like the fact, and I can see that you've been inspired by our mutual friends Donnie and Catherine at the Best Defense Foundation, is that it can't just end with the getting off the plane or getting out of the taxi cab back at the house. It has to continue because, as you said there, you used the word ambassador. They can then go on and they can spread the word about visiting battlefields and the importance of honoring those that went before. So if you want to expand on what they must do when they get back, and indeed how sponsors and donators can be involved as well, because I think that we started this conversation with how you bridge the generations. Well, you're also bridging the aspects of this project there. So anything else you kind of want to say about that aspect, the continuing work these kids do?
Right. So the program's 9 days, but the mission is a lifetime. No, so when the kids get back, they do they do essays and things like that. But from then on, I start finding, okay, you're in different states. What veterans can I connect you with in your state? So you can go and learn their story and collect it. You collect their story so that you will become representative of them, whether it's a living veteran or a KIA. I want to bring a little bit of life to the KIAs. There's a couple here where I live in San Antonio and up in Fort Worth. There's a Fort Worth soldier who is buried there, who he died in Peekaville when his C-47 crashed with 21 paratroopers. So I'm connecting his story to my Fort Worth kids. So they adopt that. That becomes their mission, and they will represent his story in perpetuity as long as they can. And then I have other activities. I've got stateside activities to get the kids together. I had a couple of the kids out to Fort Bragg in May. I was invited by some veterans of 2504 to bring my students out, and they showed the kids around the post. my kids met the top commanders of the 82nd Airborne, and these colonels and generals took the time to say, all right, you're interested in history. If you want to do more of this with your life, we're not trying to recruit you, but if you want to make this part of who you are, here are the steps from the experience of a combat soldier
Mm.
or this or this. And so work just continuing, it's a mentorship program. So continuing it to get the kids connected as much as possible in writing and reading. And then past Bridge to History ambassadors connect with the new students. I have a video from some of my students from last year telling the new students, this is what we learned, this is what to expect, this is what you need to be prepared for, because this is going to become your life. And a lot of the kids want to be history teachers, so we're starting them young.
Well, yeah. Well, people are loving it, by the way, and there's already people saying they're going to get in touch with either Operation Meatball or with Bridge to History, whatever it would be. But that's great. Next question. We talked a little bit before going live about our mutual obsession with World War II, and World War II is the war that is the one we talk about. It's the one. I mean, okay, yes, there's interest in the Civil War, there's interest in the First World War, but the wars that have come since are a little bit more complicated in terms of the reasons for being there and things like that. So with World War II, another thing that with these kids you're taking over is connecting World War II to today and today's world, and you said about that, sacrifice and patriotism. They are important, but they are also words that get hijacked in modern words.
Right.
Patriotism gets associated with one side or the other side, and if you don't believe in the same politics as me, you're not patriotic, or you are patriotic. So how do you deal with that straddle, that aspect of these should be kind of universal principles, but the water's got a bit muddied with our diverse life we live these days?
Right. And honestly, even the difference between terminology in the UK versus America, because conservative in the UK means different from conservative in America. And that doesn't mean that anymore in America. So with as far as the terminology goes, for the kids, uh, it's basic, I'd say basic life principles, which is um, patriotism is a word that has been hijacked, like you say. On my grandfather's grave, it says Howard Phillips, patriot. And I loved that. When I would go to his grave when I was younger and see that, I was like, this means he loved his country. Nowadays, that means something very different. It means you're a little bit of a kooky person. So when I talk to the kids, we say, all right, what can we learn from the men of World War II about what does it mean to love your country? Why do you even love your country? Why is that a thing? Well, it's your identity. It's who gave you birth and freedom and opportunity. So you give back to it, if that's giving your life or if that's working in your local community. Leadership is a quality that you learn from World War II. It's how do people respond to good leadership? How do they respond to bad leadership? How do you respond to fear? Fear is something we talk about, going back to when you're saying hard topics, fear is something we talk about with the kids too. One of my students who we're bringing this year, he had two grandparents. Well, he has several grandparents, but one was a Japanese American and he was in an internment camp. His other grandfather was Chinese and was in the Navy in America. And I'm really excited to dive into that with him and explain, what does fear do to your psyche when you have a country divided and literally two people of Asian descent, of background, and one you lock up and one you send to war? What does that mean, and how can we protect ourselves from that? So we look at like the core, the values and the lessons, and try and break it down. Because you're right, a lot of the terminology has been distorted. So I try, if I think it's going to be confusing, stray away from using specific words and give the idea. What is the principle of the idea? Why do we fight for each other? Why do we send people to another country to go fight our war? And why are the people of France still so grateful to the Americans? This is a concept which and I know, but I didn't know until I went to Normandy the first time. I assumed everyone in France was like, they were from Paris. But in Normandy, I learned how to be a better American from the French and the Dutch, honestly, because they are I would say, bred with gratitude. And I had never experienced gratitude this deep before. And that was really mind blowing to me. I was like, wait a minute, I've kind of been embarrassed as an American in the past about different things we do. But the people of Normandy have the ability to say, well, this event changed our life. And regardless of things that happen here and there, we are grateful to that. And it's a very overwhelming, because another aspect that the kids learn is America is not the greatest thing in the world. It's not the greatest thing since sliced bread. We're all
You're not,
humans who,
news alert, you're not the only country with a
we're
constitution.
not, we're not. I mean, one of the kids last year too, he was, when we went to the French schools and they talked with kids their age, he comes up to me afterwards and he was like, wow, I thought we were the only ones out there, and now I know we aren't. And I said, I know, these are the life lessons you learn. It's more than just war and fighting and how many people landed here and how many people were killed here, because these all are important. But for me, I'm a storyteller. So what are the values, and what are the core values and lessons you can get out of it? England, I take the kids to England, to London, because I want them to learn about the resilience of the British, the English. I mean, that's the stiff upper lip is a phrase that Americans throw around a lot because we kind of laugh at y'all for that. But it's, my gramps was a little boy during the Blitz before he went and joined the Navy, and he told me stories of what every day looked like for them. And yeah, that's not what I think a lot of us couldn't quite handle that. He's like, oh, just walking down the street and bombs are going off, or sitting on top of the theater with a bucket of water waiting to douse out any fires that happen. So we teach the kids about resilience, and then obviously Churchill's leadership. So all of these lessons are things that come together to say, this is the all-encompassing history, and these are things you can take with you as you get older and apply them to life, whether it's business or friendships or relationships. All these things apply to all corners of life, not just military.
Well, perfectly put. And you're in talking about Normandy, and we've been together at places in Normandy at ceremonies, things. Is that one of the things I always am gratified by is people are there for the reason of remembrance. They're there to visit the battlefields, to see the veterans, to see the communities come together to honor what happened in the past. But they're from different backgrounds. There's going to be rich people there, poor people there, left wing, right wing, religious, non-religious, but they've got that common goal, that common reason for being there, that shared experience of being there. And I think, to be kind of not a devil's advocate, that with children so young, it would be very easy to fill their heads with things perhaps you believed in, or perhaps you met a guide who's got a feeling about a particular country's role in the World War II. And as we said earlier, at that age, they are sponges. It'd be very easy to kind of abuse the power you've got by kind of preaching on a particular political platform or a particular way of viewing the world. But far better is to give the tools to understand the world yourself. So
that's exactly right.
Things like resilience, things like sharing things, friendship, togetherness, community spirit, they are universal. Patriotism should be something you apply across the political sphere, because people have different visions for their country, but it doesn't mean they don't love their country. So how do you reassure parents, for example? How do you reassure the donators that you're going into this with the right intention of giving these kids the access to, as you said there, different ideas? How did the British go through World War II? How do you balance that aspect?
That's a fantastic question. You have such great questions, and I really appreciate it. Really, I guess, honestly, track record, probably. I've tried to not anything in anytime someone gives a talk or tells a story or writes a book, it's coming from your background, your presuppositions and your beliefs, and all of that is influenced, but there are objective facts or objective truths. And that is what I try and communicate to the kids and to their parents through my track record writing, and just in talking with them, is say, regardless of where we're coming from, there are the objective truths of how humans should treat humans, and right and wrong, and how we respond. And what I want to do with your children is give them the big picture, and the parents come along with the kids. So it's not like the children just come with me. The parents are with their children, and that is how they're there to help guide them along in the experience and help filter and translate things they may hear along the way, which perhaps they don't understand or perhaps does disagree, because the families I bring, they have all different religious backgrounds, all different upbringings. It's a conglomeration. And so, there's the option for there to be friction in that, or to say, here is the life lessons as I see it from my perspective, and you filter that through what you believe. But there are objectives, which is that you care for the women and children, you
Mm.
defend what's right. And what's right might mean different things to different people, but there are objective rights and wrongs. You don't One country can't just go invade another country and take them prisoner. You can't decide that one ethnicity is going to be the scapegoat for all of your problems. That's just my great great uncle. He was Jewish. On my grandfather's side, they're all Jewish, and so I feel that very personally. But people who aren't of Jewish background recognize you can't just go enslave a whole culture because you don't like their background. So these are the objective truths, I would say, that I communicate to the parents and say these are what will be taught to your kids, but also with the headline of, you have to be the one to filter this with your child. If I give them a book to read, I say, I recommend you read it ahead of time. I give my stamp of approval, but read it ahead of time so that you know what your child is reading. Um, because it's a very tricky line to walk, where you aren't just like indoctrinating people with ideas. You've got to be really careful. So I just
Well,
try and always keep the parents involved in it with as
yeah.
much as possible.
And this is where it comes back to the fact you've been exposed to lots of different people from different
Yeah,
backgrounds and different countries from a very early age. Because we all find that I when I meet new people, if I found out they lived for 2 years in Singapore, they've traveled the world, they've got, you kind of relax because they've seen different things. It's when you
right.
meet someone who've grown up in a very particular part of the world, wherever it would be, and they've never left that part, that's when you realize that you're going to maybe a harder job on your hands, because they have had a view of life that has been very, very focused with people like themselves. And again, the exposure you're giving these kids just to go and meet a Chelsea pensioner in London and have a nasty cheap English kebab on a bus going through London.
I
That's
love
stuff
those
you wouldn't get to
kebabs.
do that in the USA. So that's important as well. But just to lighten the subject, people have noticed the jump wings on your necklace there.
Oh yeah,
Tell us
I'm
about the jumping out of
unashamed.
aircraft, ridiculous hobby that you've been involved in the last few years.
I have to show you this real quick. So Adam, my student from last year, drew this picture for me.
Wow.
It's all these paratroopers jumping into St. Mary Glace. Um, so the short story on the jump wings is I met my first paratrooper. I think it was oh no, it was I was 14, and I became really close with a couple of paratrooper vets, Al Mamprey, Gene Gilbreth, and a few others, and I had really precious friendships with them. And they would tell me stories. I remember there was a paratrooper, there's an 82nd guy out a couple hours away from where I lived. And he was always talking. He was the sweetest, most gentlest guy. And he was like, we paratroopers were the baddest of the bad. And he thought that was hilarious. Um, so I was hearing stories about these for years, and I thought, you know what? I would love to try it out one day. Just get my wings, because then I could do that to say, hey, I heard you guys. I honor you by submitting myself to a terrifying process. And I've got pictures my vets have sent me of them, and I was just like, I had to do this. It was just a curiosity. I had to know if it was amazing as they said it was, and I did. And then after my fifth jump, I was like, yeah, I'm not going to be a 5 jump chump. I got to do this forever. So, so this year in Normandy, I finally, Normandy was my 24th jump, and I jumped at General Gavin's drop zone, and that was the greatest. That was like the greatest moment of my life. I just landed and lay back in the grass. I got dragged for a second because my parachute pulled me. But after that, then I just lay back in the grass and I was like, this is incredible. It's June 5, 79 years 79 years and a couple of hours change after the paratroopers were landing here. This is the most incredible moment ever. So it's
Wow.
kind of, it started out as like a tribute because I wanted to really understand the experience, because you don't really understand things until you participate in it yourself. And there is some people say, "Oh, are you reenacting a paratrooper?" I'm like, "Uh-uh." As
You
soon as you
are a
exit that,
paratrooper, yeah.
you exit that plane, you ain't reenacting anything. You're jumping. So I'm not a paratrooper, but I definitely have jumped. So I highly recommend it. 10 out of 10 experience.
Yeah, I'm gonna use that old chestnut of I wish I'd done it when I was younger and I didn't. And but it's the older you do it, the more chance of a back breaking or a leg breaking. But but we'll go back to British history in a minute. But just tell us about the fact you also jump sometimes in an SOE jumpsuit. How the hell
Yes.
did that come about? I mean, obviously not an original one for those who know how much.
No. So that
But
was
that's amazing.
that was actually borrowed from a friend, because I'm working on making my own uniform SOE. I had never, again, little tidbits of history you never hear about. So several years ago, I met a girl, like 8 years ago, and she was jumping at an air show, and she was in SOE, and I'd never seen anything about like this before. I was like, a girl paratrooper jumping in an Oompa Loompa suit with a dress underneath. This is really interesting. So I started studying it more, and the OSS and SOE, which was the British and American Special Service
Yep.
units. It was like the precursor to the CIA and all that stuff. Well, on the American side, they would jump female agents into Europe, France, Netherlands, all Belgium, all around, and they wore these oversized. I call them Teletubby Oompa Loompa outfits because they look hilarious, and they're kind of a canvas material. They've got
Camouflage
different.
though, camouflage.
Yes, camouflage. It's got like the brush stroke paint on it, and underneath you wear a dress, like a full dress. And so what would happen is the operatives would land under cover of darkness. They'd take off the Teletubby suit, bury it in the ground, which is why we don't have a lot of them left. There's at the Special Forces Museum in Fort Bragg is an amazing SOE uniform. And then they'd walk into town wearing regular clothes, and no one would ever know they'd just been parachuted in from another country. So for Normandy, I was really excited to represent that, because I'm not a soldier, I'm not a paratrooper. I'm I I don't. It's not that I want to stay in my lane. I just want to be authentic and represent as best as possible. And I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity. So when I jumped and I packed up the suit in my parachute bag and walked in wearing a polka dot dress, there was a lot of people who were horrified. They thought I'd literally just parachuted in a dress, which it's more complicated than that. So, but then I got to tell the story of these operatives, and people are saying, I'd never heard of this before. So it's just, you use every opportunity you can for
It's
education.
again, it's the making the connection. It's giving
Exactly.
someone something to talk about. Why the hell are you wearing that? That can't be right. And then you, as I know you, you would
Yeah.
correct them in a very polite and generous way. But yeah, no, let me tell you about the SOE and the jumpsuits they wore. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, hats off to you for jumping out of an aircraft. And was it? Did you say 24 times? Did you say?
Normandy was my 24th. So
Wow.
it was, I'm still in the low totem pole. I'm only at 25 now, but
The
we'll get
irony
up there.
is that half of the paratroopers I knew, they were lucky to get. They would break 10 would be a lot in World War II
Yeah.
generally.
A,
I mean, there were some guys that did two combat jumps and that was it, or one. And hats off to these guys. But I mean, obviously very different jumping into combat than it is jumping commemoratively in
oh
2023. But
yeah.
yeah, it's we're not making that suggestion, folks, that there's anything actually connecting. But it's the
Mm,
experience of rushing, and again, it's the ability you have to bond with these people. If you've been to Vietnam, you've been to the places you talk to the veterans from, so that when you meet a veteran from Iwo Jima or Normandy, you can have that conversation that connects with him and their experiences, which goes back to that thing we discussed of that opening salvo of how do you make that conversation. But if you say, oh yeah,
you
I've been to
find
Vietnam,
ways to connect with them, right? And it's sometimes I don't think about this, and then it hits me down the road. So after, I never thought that jumping was going to connect me with the vets better. I was just thought, hey, this is going to be really neat. But immediately after I went through that experience, and I'm talking with my vets, not just World War II, but veterans, paratrooper veterans from all wars, it was almost like, it was like, okay, you kind of join the club now because you know what I'm talking about. So when I talk about a PLF, or when I talk about, a bad landing or X, Y, and Z, I don't have to explain. You know what it is. And so I have more to tell you. I'm working on becoming a rigger. So I pack parachutes, but I'm working on becoming a licensed rigger because I love the process. But I went to a veteran, a Navy vet of mine, who used to be a parachute rigger on a carrier. I've known him for 10 years. But this was the first time I told him. I was like, "Hey, I pack my parachutes now." It was like the floodgates opened, and he had stories to tell me I'd never heard before of what it's like packing parachutes and watching planes land and take off and crash and all these things. And so, yeah, finding little ways to connect. For anyone listening, you don't have to be so extreme and go get jump wings so you can talk to a paratrooper, I promise. But if you want to, it's great. But yeah, it's just all about finding ways to connect and understand, with the reality that I'm a civilian through and through, but the more I can learn and experience and understand, the better, the more willing they are to invest their story with me, and then I'm the caretaker of it.
Well, it's a good time to bring up the subject that I'm going to ask a question from a viewer now, because we haven't talked about the fact that your sisters as well sing as well. There's
Yes.
lots of vocalists involved in and singing and stuff, and it's about the connection, the wearing of the gear, the having the shared experiences, because it's a potential big rabbit hole. So we might don't want to spend too long discussing this. But Kevin Getz, regular viewer who's been on the show talking about the horse and glider, could Liberty expand upon the role of the reenactor with the education process of the public? Too often there's a bad rap about reenactors, and what about the outreach and education possibly? So I don't know whether you classify yourself as a reenactor. I mean, you definitely wear period gear. Do you use that term?
You're right. This is a very touchy subject for a lot of people. My answer to that is, my sisters and I, especially at the beginning when we were starting Operation Maple for the first several years, we did a lot of civilian, you can call it whatever you want, reenacting, living history, impression, whatever. I never formally considered myself a reenactor because I I was using the I was using the wardrobe as a way of connecting with the vets. I mean, it's a real thrill to be in Normandy dressed in original 1940s clothing or reproduction when everything is turned back in time. So that is spectacular. But we found that when we would dress up civilian, because I never did military impressions before, I wasn't quite interested in that as much. When we would do civilian, I would have vets come up to me and say, "You look just like my wife did." And he'd pull out a photo and show me a picture, and he was right. And so I mean, you could say, people would probably say we did reenacting. I wouldn't formalize it as that because it was just, I wanted to represent what was the home front during the war, and also use that. It was like a gift to some of the veterans. They would say, "Thank you so much for dressing like this because you just took me back 70 years." And that sounds corny, but when I think about the relationships and the friendships I had with the vets that built off of that, it was really life changing. So I think the reenactor community, yeah, it's a fun, it's chaotic, there's a lot going on. But for me and the girls, we're looking again for opportunities. How we connect with the vets when there's a big event, a D-Day event up in Ohio, which we used to go to years ago when they had a big veteran tent running. And so we would go up there, but we always wore period clothing because that's how we'd chat up the old vets. Um, but you mentioned, again, because I could go down another bunny trail with this. So Faith singing. So Faith, I have three sisters, but initially it was me and Jubilee and Faith, who were the two ones right under me. Faith has a magnificent voice. She's currently, has a jazz band which she plays all around. But she was with Operation Meeple. She is still, but she was singing with us for quite a number of years. And I just realized I've probably never told anyone this story, but it's hilarious. It just reminded me when we went to Normandy for the 70th anniversary. Faith was 14, and we had no idea what we were doing because we were very young. Faith was 14, Jubilee was 16, I was 17. We were just like, we want to go, we need to go meet the veterans because this is going to be the last time, one of the last times we now know. And Faith had a printout. My dad helped her put a printout of like 10 songs. It was a song menu. And she literally carried that around. And if we met a vet, she would give the vet the menu and she would say, I know you don't know me. I can sing you a song though. Would you pick one?
Living
And
jukebox. Yeah, fantastic.
yes, yes. I don't think it was quite as funny after a while. I was like, I'll put a coin in you, Faith. But that was an incredible connector. And I was talking to one of my D-Day vets last week, and he talks about that. He says, when y'all walked up to me and handed me that menu and I picked out it had to be you, that was the best moment of the trip. And here we are 10 years later, 9 years later with that friendship. So yeah, that's a funny, it sounds so, now I think about it, it sounds so corny, but it
It's
worked.
a great story. Cool on
It
you, but
worked.
cool, great. But I mean, I think for me to draw a line under the reenactment, living history, whatever you want to call it, is it comes down to why you're doing it. Are you doing it to make connections with the public, to make connections with the past, to make connections with the veterans? If you're doing it because you think you look cool dressing up as a stormtrooper in a free, then I question your motive somewhat. Is it about you or is it about what you can bring to other
If you're
people?
using it as an education.
Yeah, that's where how much you spend on the gear, what you're dressed as, it doesn't necessarily impact it. It's what your motivation is. But
because that can inspire a lot of the kids. Honestly, most people I talk to today, the young kids coming with me on the programs, they were interested in things, and then they saw a reenactor at an event and was like, that looks cool, I want to study more about it. So, and you learn things tactile, however, it was your hands. So seeing a uniform, feeling it, touching it, looking at the boots, why are they shined, why aren't they shined? These are things which are they all help young minds learn and retain better. But yeah, the motive is what it is. If you're using it educationally, it is so fruitful. It is such a wonderful way to take your uniform to a school and show the kids. If it's because you want to be a stormtrooper, well, that's different priorities.
No, definitely. And again, it's back to that idea about if seeing a World War II paratrooper helmet is the tactile event that then you can bring up the fact. And yes, and we're standing exactly where some of the people who wore this helmet died. And let's go this afternoon and see their graves. And here's a photo of one of them. That's your inroad. That's how you got to that place, by taking that journey, starting at the cool bit, in a sense, the helmet, but ending at the bit that references sacrifice. So we're going around the houses with this conversation. To bring it back to Bridge to History, and people can help you out. There's already been at least one donation's got in to your website while we've been talking, so hopefully there'll be more, folks. If there's not a flurry of activity in Liberty's email account, I will be very disappointed at you. So you've got Woody's. I'm gonna do a hard stare, folks. They're a hard stare. But what are your plans this year? And next year, because let's talk about the future.
We have a group of kids I'm taking in October. 8 kids, very, very excited. Next year is our schedule's thrown off a little bit because we're going to adjust. I have a program over the 80th. So it'll be a modified program, just because the 80th is going to have a lot going on. But long-term with Bridge to History, it's more than just Normandy. I want to start the kids in Normandy, London and Normandy, and get them that footing, but also take them to other locations. I want them to meet the Dutch. I learned gratitude from the French, and I learned how to be matter of fact from the Dutch. So it's Market Garden is a huge part of history, which again gets overlooked by a lot of things. I want to take them to Belgium. So next year we have our big 80th program, but then hopefully we'll have 1 or 2 smaller programs in the spring and the fall, and then stateside activities. I would say for anyone listening in, if you have a child or a grandkid who might be interested, we have the applications always open, because sometimes kids have to postpone. Sometimes we end up having extra space. But if you send the application in, I know my age bracket listed on the website is I think 8 to 12. But if they're a little bit older, a little bit younger, send the app in anyway so that we can have that information and get in touch with you. If not for an international trip, for one of our stateside activities. I'm going to be taking the kids to Toccoa, Georgia, so they can run them out and really experience that and meet the people there. So yes, get in the application, spread the word, as many kids as we can reach as possible, because they are the key to the future. They're a legacy. What we invest in them is what is going to make or break a lot of things for all of our countries, for UK, for France, for me.
Brilliant. And on the subject of the UK, Gary August asked ages ago in the show, does Liberty know of any UK equivalent? And if there isn't one, would you like there to be one and work with them if such an organization existed?
Yes. I don't know. I know a lot of veteran groups over there and veteran organizations, but not any with kids. I would love to expand over to the UK. It's different because it's not like my backyard is Texas, but I would definitely consider expanding over there.
No, definitely, and it's as I've been saying when I was talking about this show on Twitter. You know, without making you go red in the face, you're inspirational. You inspire people. Your dedication to this is a really good boost in the arm for some of us who, you know, I said on Twitter today, if, you know, having a bad day at the archives, who are trying to write a chapter of a book, just listening to you speak about this with such enthusiasm is a real, it's catnip. It's fantastic. Your
It's just
enthusiasm is
FOMO.
extraordinary.
I'm just afraid of missing out on something and having someone else miss out on something.
Well, indeed. I mean, again, so your first point there about the fact overcoming the nervousness of talking to a veteran, but the potential reward you would get if you took that step forward, just like you stepped forward when you jumped out the C-47 that first time, or whichever aircraft you jumped out the first time. It's that first step that then leads to something else. And you know, and I don't know when I first met you, but to think that I didn't know that at this point you're going to be bringing 8 kids to Normandy and showing them around the sites. I mean, it's truly amazing. Our cynical old dogs who've been around the block need a bit of inspiration every now and then to remind us why we do things. So, well, I can't wait to see you again in October. I'm going to offer my services to give you an Angevilo plan tour if you'd like one. That'd be
Yes.
really good. And it's been great talking to you. So, any final words? Anything else you want to say about Bridge to History that you haven't got across?
No, I just hands-on is the best way to learn, and it changed my life playing in the dirt, charging Bunker Hill, Pickett's Charge, all that. So if it worked for me, I hope it'll work for these kids. The children, don't underestimate a kid's ability to learn and to retain. They are sponges. They want to learn. You have to give them the opportunity, though. So yes.
Well, that is an absolute perfect way to end it. So, Liberty, it's been amazing talking to you. Your Normandy mum in the other room is really
I
pleased to
love
watch you.
her.
We all love Mag, and I can't wait to have an excuse to bring you back again because it's been
Yes.
great. We had it kind of scheduled a couple of years ago, and it didn't happen, but now it is. I'm glad. And so, folks, you know what to do. Go out there, check out the website, see what you can consider in terms of helping or sharing with other people, and maybe put your own great grandkids or kids through to the program because it's an amazing opportunity to tour Normandy and beyond with an amazing person. Liberty, I've loved talking to you. It's been fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Brilliant. I will see you in a month or a month and a half's time or something. Cheers,
Yes,
everybody.
very close. Bye-bye.
This is Paul Dad for World War II TV saying I'll see you all again tomorrow. Cheers. Bye.